Hello, I'm Cheryl McCarthy. Welcome to One to One. Anyone who's been shopping for anything during the last year has found that prices have risen at a shocking rate for food, gasoline, houses, apartments, for virtually everything. The U.S. Department of Labor says inflation is at its highest level in 40 years and that consumer prices were almost 9% higher this year than last. What has caused this drastic increase in prices? What can be done to bring prices down? And will reducing inflation create other kinds of pain? Linda Allen is the William F. Aldinger Professor of Banking and Finance at the Zicklin School of Business at Baruch College. She'll give us a primer on the current economic situation, as well as her own take on how it can be fixed. Welcome.
Hi, Cheryl. It's nice.
So how do we get to such a high level of inflation?
Well, it will come as no surprise to you and to your viewers that we are coming off of a very atypical period in our history following the pandemic, when the economy was shut down for extended periods of time, creating all kinds of supply chain and other economic perturbations, problems. And the end result is where we are now. Now, I should say that part of the reason we're in this situation was an important remedy during the pandemic, because if you think back to the bad old days of the start of the pandemic, think about February, March, April of 2020, which was a frightening time. It was a frightening time for us personally and health-wise, but it was also a frightening time for the economy, because the economy was in a great state of unrest, and there was real fear out there. And the Federal Reserve System, the central bank of the United States, the preeminent central bank in the world, stepped in, as it should have, with the important remedy. And we really have Ben Bernanke's playbook that was played back there. When the system goes into crisis, the Federal Reserve should not be shy in retiring. It should not pull its punches. It should come in all guns blazing with all the tools it has at its disposal, and even with some new tools.
Now, Congress, I guess it was Congress that stepped in with the big, huge stimulus packages. Right. You know, giving money to businesses to help keep them afloat, giving money to individuals, extending unemployment benefits. But what did the Federal Reserve do back then? Yes.
So even preceding those very important activities that Congress engaged in at light speed, I should say, because the PPP was approved, it ended April 4th, so it was really right on target. The Federal Reserve System also backstopped the economy. What do I mean by that? So generally, financial markets are all about trading securities. What are securities? They're just promises to repay at some point, either through dividends or through interest payments. The Federal Reserve, but people were very frightened and were afraid to take on the risk associated with these securities because nobody knew whether the entities would be able to repay them. And by entities, I'm not only talking about businesses, I'm talking about governments as well, and individuals. And so the economy shut down. Financial markets shut down. We saw at the end of March a huge spike in what we call spreads, the cost of obtaining money, risking money. So what the Fed did is said, don't worry, we got your back, people. You can buy those securities. You can lend money, because in case there is a problem repaying, we will repay it. That's in colloquial terms what they did.
Okay.
There's a lot of acronyms, which I'm not going to make your eyes glaze over about, but that's essentially what they did.
So the government poured a lot of money into
the
economy. And your definition of inflation is basically too much money chasing too few goods?
Correct.
And that's where we are now.
Yes.
Now, the stimulus money has ended, correct?
Well, that stimulus money has ended, but we have new stimulus money that has continued. Now remember, again, it wasn't too long ago that we had another $1 trillion package. And of course, we have what's called euphemistically the Inflation Reduction Act, which is anything but.
Okay.
But but I think the important thing is to sort of see that thread, because the remedy that was spot on and appropriate in March, April, May of 2020 is no longer appropriate. And I had a talk that I gave May 5th, 2020. And at that time, really, the markets were recovering, but we were still very much in the depths of the pandemic. And I called it Start the World I Want to Get On, because at that time, my analysis was showing that the economy was poised to recover. And that was the time for us to start pulling back on this extraordinary stimulus. And we didn't.
Okay. So recently I saw a story on CBS, I think it was CBS Morning News Report, about the high price of milk. And it was said that a gallon of milk now costs about $1 more than it did a year ago. But dairy farmers say they're not benefiting from that because their feed prices are up. The feed companies say they're not benefiting because they have to pay more for gas and soybeans. Is anybody making money off inflation? Does greed play a part? I mean, are companies charging more than they need to respond to their increased costs?
Look, I can't say there aren't any gougers out there in the world. All opportunities allow nefarious players to take advantage. But I can tell you that that is not the dominant problem that we have. That is certainly not the problem that we see overall in the agricultural business, which is so competitive and so widespread, even with agribusiness, that there is just no chance for any individual farming conglomerate even to drive the price of milk or wheat or whatever. What we have is I think what we should consider it is the cruel tax of inflation, which hurts everybody. Nobody's benefiting from it. All of those entities at every stage of the production process are truly passing on increased costs.
Yeah.
Until it comes to us. And we say, where did that extra dollar come from? And it came from all of those stages of the production process that are truly more costly. So I don't believe it's price gouging.
And the people who are hurting most from the high prices are the people who hurt most from everything, which are low income, poor people, and people of color.
That's why I call it a cruel tax, because it doesn't distinguish between those who really do need a hand to get through their lives and those who don't. Everybody's hurt.
So the Federal Reserve's approach to reducing inflation has been their announced the approach they've taken, and they say they're going to continue it, is to increase interest rates. How does the Fed's increasing interest rates serve to reduce inflation? How does that work?
Okay, so this is the shorthand that my colleagues and I expect people to understand. And I'm going to take it back a step, if I can, to an analogy to understand really what's driving inflation, and then maybe we'll see where interest rate increases affect that. So an analogy is in a bathtub. And we have a bathtub with a level of water. The water comes in out of the spout and goes down out the drain. And I want to use as an analogy for the water, the level of water in the bathtub is the level of the price index. Remember, inflation is just that all prices, not of one item, but of all items, generally are going up together. And that price index is going to be, we're going to stand in the level of water to reflect that price index. Well, what will raise or lower the level of water in the bathtub? We have water coming out the spout, and the speed with which the water comes out the spout will increase the level of water in the bathtub and raise the level of inflation prices. Well, what are those, that water in the bathtub? That's all of us trying to buy all the goodies that we want. You know, stepping up to buy Teslas and food and electricity and all of the items and entertainment that we want. That's what's fueling the water coming out of the spout. That's what the water coming out of the spout reflects. And as people had more and more money because of stimulus and because they were really very well employed during the pandemic, they were able to increase the pressure of water coming out of that spout. But what did we have during the pandemic? We had supply chain problems. We stopped up that drain. It was clogged up, and we didn't have the supply of the items that people wanted available. So what did we have? The water in the bathtub is coming in stronger and stronger, and the drain is not open all the way. And what we have is a rise in the level of the water, which of course is the inflation we're seeing.
But how does raising the interest rate help empty the bathtub?
Excellent, excellent. So now let's understand what that analogy of the water coming in down into the bathtub is all about. What that is essentially the ability of people to provide, to step up and say, I want to buy this, I want to buy that, I have the money to do so. What does the higher interest rate do that the Fed has pursued? Well, first let's think about the lower interest rates, because that's where we're coming off of. Remember again, what the Fed in March of 2020 did was lowered interest rates down to 0, basically. So what did that do? Why was that increasing the amount of water coming out of the spout? Well, because people have more money that they could then borrow to buy houses, businesses to invest in R&D or factories, governments to essentially have their debt financed. That cost of money, which is what interest rates are, it's just another price, just like every other price. That price was set super low. So that meant people were buying houses and cars of course, borrowing money. Governments were borrowing money for stimulus. Individual businesses were borrowing money to expand their businesses, as they should, because the price of money was cheap. What happens, and so that's of course feeding the pressure of the water coming out the spout. What happens when the Fed starts to raise interest rates? Now, the price of money is more expensive. Now, we all know, we've seen in the housing market, people are not able to afford houses. So people are not buying those houses. They're not buying new houses. They're not buying furnishings to furnish those houses. There's a whole ripple effect from the housing market. Businesses are affected. If I was going to open a new store or a new factory or expand my business in some way, now the cost of borrowing money to do so is high. And so I may choose not to do so. All of that does is lowers the pressure of the water because there's less money chasing the goods in the economy.
But if businesses, if they raise interest rates, if businesses cannot expand, that means they can't produce more products.
Exactly, exactly. So it is a self-defeating mechanism. That's why I say to you, you know, we can fight inflation either the harder or the hard way.
Right.
And it seems that we have chosen the harder way.
Okay.
And that is, again, by cutting down, closing the valve, cutting down the pressure of the water in the bathtub, trying to cut the amount of water coming in to a trickle. Because of course, that's just following the analogy, that's going to release the pressure on the price level, on the water level. But of course, that's going to do that at great social costs.
Because it also means that businesses have to lay people off. And people lose lose jobs. So is the only way you can fight inflation to have higher unemployment? Is that the only way to do it?
So that's the way, and Powell said just that. Essentially, that's the harder way. That's what the way is we're pursuing.
You create more pain.
You create more pain. You get that bathtub water down to a trickle, and that means all of the goodies that we all want are not there. What I'm saying is we're going to see some of that. I'm not saying that this is exclusive, but I would like to talk about not an alternative, but a complementary, they work together, way to deal with this. And anybody who has had a stop drain, this is common sense. You don't need a PhD in finance and economics to do this. You unstop the drain. We are in a unique situation, I think, because there's this window of opportunity because supply chain problems are so much really stopping up the economy from doing what it is poised to do, which is open the drain and produce those goods and release the pressure, some of the pressure on prices. What we need to do is focus our policy not only on the harder route, but also on the hard route. There's no easy route. That's why inflation is a horrible thing to start. Most central bankers avoid any inflationary pressure like the plague. And unfortunately, we're there. So now we have to figure out what to do about it. We're going to see some pain. There's just no getting around it. I don't want to sugarcoat it. But we can alleviate the pain somewhat if we could unstop that drain.
And you have said that one way we can do that is to look at our immigration policies to change those.
Correct.
What do you mean by that?
So we have, it's unusual for an economy at the stage that we're in. We have a very low rate of unemployment and a huge number, millions of job offerings that are going unfilled. There is the ability to put people to work. And remember, when people go to work, they produce all those goodies we want, unstopping the drain. Of course, they also buy more things, increasing the water pressure into the bathtub. But the idea is that we're bringing both into line with one another. So we have an opportunity to fill those jobs because the United States is a draw to the world. Immigrants want to come here. And what we want to do, therefore, is have a legal and orderly immigration process so that we bring in people who can benefit themselves from the economic promise of the American dream, which I still am unabashedly willing to acknowledge. I myself am the recipient of that, and I believe in it. And I think the immigrant population does as well. So we want to open the doors to them in a legal fashion, in an orderly fashion, and allow them to work and contribute to the economy, thereby benefiting not just themselves, but all of us.
So how would we do that? What restrictions would we lift?
So the easiest thing, and again, we can have short-term, medium-term, long-term solutions, but almost the no-brainer is something I know more about as being an academic and serving on recruiting committees, and most of our doctoral students in this country come from all over the world, which is, I think, a testament to how good our educational system truly is. And so people come here from all over to study in higher education, undergraduate and graduate degrees. Our doctoral students, and some of them have been in this country for a decade or more because they've been pursuing their education. They've been here on student visas. They graduate, they are eminently employable, and we throw them out. Why? Because they have to have what's called an H-1B visa. Now, H-1B visas are not only competed for by academics, but the high-tech industry is also an avid consumer of these H-1B visas.
And there's a limit on them.
And there is a very strong low limit, so much so that when the lottery for H-1B visas opens up on the very first day, I think within the very first hour, all of the slots are taken. Now, I don't understand this at all, because these are educated people. They generally have job offers. Many of them have been trained by us, and they are very much.
You're not talking about migrant laborers.
We're
talking about highly educated.
We're talking about people who will contribute more than they take out of our system here. We should be competing for them. Instead, they're forced to leave this country. I don't see why there is any limitation at all on H-1B visas, and I'm not soft on immigration generally. I think we do need an immigration limits. I think we need to do it in an orderly, as I say, legal fashion. But from my standpoint, H-1B visas, removing the cap is a no-brainer.
Is anybody saying this other than you?
No, I haven't heard anybody else say it, so I don't know.
So we heard it here. The Biden administration, you referred to this, just pushed through something called the Inflation Reduction Act. What exactly does it do, and will it reduce inflation?
So back to our analogy, it's just feeding water into that bathtub. What the Inflation Reduction Act is anything but. It is stimulus. It's providing money for drug program, for, buying electric vehicles, whatever. All of these things may be very worthwhile objectives. We're not talking about that right now. What we're talking about this purely is from the lens of inflation. If you are in an inflationary crisis, and we are, as your introduction said, then you do not do things that's going to increase the volume of water coming out of the faucet. You try to limit that. And so we are working against ourselves. So now you're going to say, well, the Fed is doing it. No need to worry. You know, the federal government can keep spending, but the Fed is doing it by raising interest rates. Well, I'm going to say to you that that's not true either. Because though the Fed has raised interest rates 2.25% over the last couple of months, which is light speed for a central bank, it's truly historic, it's not fighting inflation yet. All we're doing is reversing the extraordinarily easy, low interest rates that we put in place in 2020, but that we have left in place even as the economy recovered in 2021 and 2022.
Now you feel the interest rate should be even higher?
It's got to be if we're talking about fighting inflation.
Okay.
We haven't even, in my view, we have not even begun the process. I think that's what might be weighing. Again, I'm not predicting the stock market, but I think that might be weighing on the stock market, because I think people are realizing, hey, we thought we were at the end, but we really are at the beginning of this process.
People are really worried about steps that will take us into a recession.
Okay.
Are we in danger of a recession? Do you predict we're going to go into a recession, or what?
So economics is the dismal science, and I wore this bright-colored blouse just because I knew it was going to be a dismal message I was giving. But in my view, we are already in a recession. We are at the cusp of either a very light recession, which is what my data is showing us, or a heavy recession. And that's why I'm here today, because it's in our hands. We can choose.
That we don't have to go into a recession?
We don't have to go into a very deep recession. We could choose the harder way, which would entail a deep and painful recession, or we could choose the hard way, which will entail a light and short-lived recession. It's up to us.
It's all very interesting, a little complicated, but I think you have helped to simplify it.
I'm glad.
And
I've enjoyed talking to you.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. I'd like to thank Linda Allen, the William F. Aldinger Professor of Banking and Finance at the Zicklin School of Business and Finance at Baruch College, for joining me today. To learn about our upcoming shows, you can follow us on Twitter at 1-to-1 CUNY TV. For the City University of New York and 1-to-1, I'm Sheryl McCarthy.